So about a week ago, an illegal Congolese savage by the name of Fiston Ngoy, who had accrued a mile-long criminal record before he even set foot on American soil, had openly raped a woman on a crowded Philadelphia-bound train. A heinous act which occurred for over 40 minutes and over 20 scheduled stops. And throughout this whole crime, the only response from any outlooker, who wasn't just sitting there doing nothing, was to whip out a phone and, nope, not call the police, but to film it. World star! You know, it's time to admit to ourselves that some cultures are demonstrably better than others. As for the rest of the world, who weren't on board that train and have only heard about the crime from a safe distance provided to them by their preferred internet gadgets, well, they were morally outraged. How could the onlookers just sit there and do nothing? Shouldn't they be charged with a crime too? Should they? Did these bystanders actually have a choice to do anything? Could these onlookers have intervened in any way without suffering life-destroying consequences themselves, both physically and legally, within a Democrat-run shithole? Allow me to explain the circumstances that have led to this inevitable heinous crime, and for the many more just like it to come, I promise you. To begin, this violent, subhuman ooga-booga bastard, a proven violent criminal within his own homeland, and we are talking about a nation rife with political corruption, tribal warfare, the Ebola virus, and even cannibalism. So that's saying a lot about this fucking savage who was allowed to roam freely within our streets. He would never have been allowed into the country in the first place if it weren't for the Democrats prioritizing welfare-draining illegals over tax-paying American citizens for the last 30 years. Because these boomer neoliberals and champagne socialists alike, they've become such intolerable elitist whores for corporate tyrants that they need a new voting base just to maintain power. One who would happily trade constitutional rights for some Gibbs, because they've only known tin-horn socialist dictatorships their whole life, so what would liberty even mean to them anyways? And so now you know why Kamala Harris told anti-communist Cubans to not come here. The only group of refugees to ever be denied by the Let's Go Brandon administration. My second point. In nearly every deep blue Democrat-run jurisdiction, be it a city or an entire state, not only has your average Joe and Jane been legislatively disarmed to a point where gangbangers have an easier time securing firearms than a law-abiding citizen, and let that sink in, but if a citizen were to intervene in any capacity that would lead to the injury or death of the rapist, said vigilante would most likely get charged, convicted, and rotting in a jail cell for a longer period than your average said gangbanger, even the repeat offenders. My third point. If a white male like myself were to personally risk life and limb to stop this rape from continuing, what are the chances that if the intervening citizen were to successfully stop the black rapist, there would be political blowback? Would he be charged with a hate crime? Would the narrative be spun by corporate media to paint the white Samaritan with a racist brush? You think I'm joking? What have we seen plastered all over the news for the last 8 years since Michael Brown? Whenever a black criminal violently assaults a white cop, even with video evidence, the officer's livelihood is destroyed, the criminal is turned into a Christ figure, especially in George Floyd's case, and all of the race-baiting woke activists further fatten their wallets on the dime of mostly white taxpayers. All the while, black neighborhoods get progressively more dangerous and destitute, ironically enough. The only type of progress that progressives have ever been able to achieve. If a white cop with a more legally expansive right to kill a perpetrator than your average citizen, if he is not immune from the ravages of a woke witch hunt, what chances does Mr. Cracker Nobody like myself have? Also, keep in mind that the Democrats disarmed their constituents mostly during the Clinton administration, under the pretense that citizens need not worry about defending themselves because they were making their law enforcement agencies more robust and militarized during their tough on crime phase. which led to a dramatic increase in incarceration of mostly minor drug offenders, during a time when prisons were becoming privatized for-profit ventures, and whenever big business could not outsource their operations into some third-world dictatorship, they had the prisoners manufacturing their wares for less than $1 a day. Cut to 25 years later, and the senator who spearheaded this legislative return of such chain gang-style cheap labor exploitation, he is now our president, and our leading voice in this bullshit narrative that the same law enforcement that he helped to militarize is now a crucial part of the white supremacist system that needs dismantling. And now, after law enforcement has been adequately dismantled in nearly every Democrat-run city, the police no longer have the manpower nor resources to investigate a majority of crimes being committed. So in other words, blue state citizens not only lack the means and legal rights to adequately defend themselves, but they're also on their own if they're victimized by a crime not deemed severe enough by a strapped and demoralized police force. Personally, if I just so happen to be in an urban Democrat-run shithole, for whatever reason that even eludes me at this point, and I witness a black criminal assaulting a non-black woman, I know that my first instinct would be to run to that woman's aid, whatever her race was, mind you, and completely disregard my own personal safety in the process. A process that most Democrats today would condemn as cis-male toxic masculinity. Probably white supremacy too. And because of Democrats and their constant subverting of American cultural norms, American norms shit, more like long-established gender dimorphic symbiosis within our own species, thanks to 50 years of feminism, I now would have to second-guess my own initial impulse and think pragmatically about the consequential well-being of my own wife. If I were to die or be jailed long-term for my attempt at saving a stranger's life, who would take care of her? Who would pay the bills? Who would keep her safe? My life potentially sacrificed for the benefit of a woman who I don't know could very well endanger the life of a woman that I've made a lifelong commitment to protect and provide for. And would my sacrifice even be recognized as a heroic act by the very Democrats who prioritize melanin levels over civilized behavior? I fucking doubt it. My final point. And this one focuses on the black onlookers. No one other than a handful of brave black patriots will dare to publicly comment on this. My warm regards to Brandon Tatum and Jericho Green, my ideological brethren. For the last 50 years, every black community has deteriorated into a gang-infested war zone, where 3 generations of young black men, raised without fathers, are gunning down their own brothers in catastrophic numbers, for the mere right to sell adulterated zombie-making poison to their remaining kin, just so they can waste their ill-gotten blood money on pointless, gaudy vanities. But are they the ones openly criticized by their black peers and neighbors? No. You know who are, though? Those who call the cops on them. You know, as a black man, you can shoot a fellow black man in the face for his expensive footwear. You could sell drugs to black school children. You can even treat black women like disposable cum receptacles and degrade the traditional act of romantic courtship into that of rotting by your average four-legged mammal. That's all fine. But snitches get stitches, am I right? There is no worse cultural offense among these Wakandans, except for maybe voting for someone other than a Democrat. You know, the very party that had run every black community into the ground for the last 50 years. My final point is now going to make an even darker turn, one that is controversial, and one that is forbidden for a white male like myself to even mention. But I'm going to do it anyways because fuck you. There are 2 polarizing realities that one can find on the internet. One that is completely fabricated by corporate media, and another that's been revealed through self-incriminating uploads from the black urban community. You'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of videos showing young black males assaulting and robbing non-black victims, mostly women and the elderly, and you will notice 2 general responses from the black onlookers. A group of his peers will openly cheer, laugh, dance, and praise him for his assault, while a handful of elders stare quietly, knowing that they will be treated like coon race traders if they intervened. This is the end result of 50 years of communist academia and Democrat policy working in tandem to convince blacks that regardless of everything that Martin Luther King had achieved, the system will always be rigged against him. And if playing by the rules will get a black person nowhere, then criminality has become a virtuous act of rebellion against the supposedly racist system. Ironically enough, the majority of blacks who swallowed this fatalistic woke bullshit are those who live in majority black communities, with little to no intimate contact with white people. Whereas, the majority of those more rural working class blacks who have lived and worked among many whites throughout their whole lives, although they have experienced a few racist remarks and gestures from a few racist individuals, when it comes to the proclamation that America today is a white supremacist nation, they have no fucking clue as to what these woke retards are even babbling on about. In fact, many working class blacks will tell you that they are usually treated better by whites than by inner city blacks, especially young black males, with their pants sagging off their asses, concealing unregistered firearms, which they are so quick to draw at the slightest confrontation, and with no clue as to who his father is, and sometimes his own kids. You know, a particular subgroup of blacks that the rest of America is culturally forced into holding in higher regard than those Uncle Tom pariahs who unforgivably hold jobs, pay taxes, obey laws, raise their kids, and are increasingly disappointed in Democrat corruption. The aforementioned Congolese rapist, Fiston Ngoy, is part of this overvalued and overprotected subgroup. Young black men between 18 and 35 and around 5% of the total US population are committing the majority of interracial crimes today. Be the victims white, Hispanic, Asian, transgender, all of them. And be it assault, rape, murder, theft, every violent fucking crime. It wasn't always like this. Before the 1960s, which is when radical communist activists were convincing a large portion of the black community to embrace their racial identity over an inclusive American one, the majority of black families, in spite of the racial discrimination they had to face, remained intact, economically self-sufficient, and their crime rates were as relatively low as their white counterparts. So what changed? Well, much of this phenomenon can be attributed to what I call the aristocrat effect, which is when a society undeservedly regards a small group as both infallible and above the rules that everyone else has to follow, be it for whatever reason, and in the end, they behave worse than those supposedly under them. So if the left convinces enough blacks that they are incapable of racism, regardless of their contradictory behavior and their criminality, always excused as their only option to get by while living in an oppressive system, then they will become the most violent and racist among us. This is also why there are today more black supremacists holding positions of authority, be it corporate, academic, and governmental, than there are actual members of the KKK. And no one is allowed to even recognize this fact, let alone stand up against it. Hey, why bother learning social control or even self-discipline when you will receive far more benefits from acting like a corrupt, selfish, and bigoted asshole with a mindset frozen in a perpetual state of adolescent narcissism, and the only response the public is allowed to convey is either apologia or political deflection towards a designated scapegoat. And we know who that whipping boy is. It's the one constantly chided for his privileges, never fully detailed by his accusers. Now, some may say that the alphabet people are rivaling the Kangs when it comes to woke hierarchy, and the controversy surrounding David Chappelle right now certainly supports their claims. You know that Dave Chappelle can contemptuously shit on whites all he wants within his standard routines. So long as they aren't sexually confused, mind you, or else we will have a major cultural crisis on our hands, apparently. Only a week before a Pennsylvania woman was enriched with authentic Congolese culture, A boy who wore girls' clothing and proclaimed himself pansexual had anally raped 2 underage girls in female-designated bathrooms in 2 different schools within Virginia's Loudoun County district. And the police were not called to investigate these tragic cases. That is, until the father of one of the victims was arrested for vocalizing his outrage towards the local school board, who initially tried to sweep the first incident under the rug by relocating the offending student to another school, where he assaulted his second victim in the same manner. And when the incident went viral on social media, our beloved corporate journalistic heroes went above, beyond, and out of their way to not label the rapist as trans. Even though the fucker wore women's clothing and frequented women's bathrooms. Because public opinion towards these degenerate bundles of sticks is far more important than our need to keep our biological girls from getting ass raped in a school bathroom. So, between a dindu on a Philadelphia train and a troon in a Virginia school bathroom, whichever of these 2 groups is finally declared the most marginalized will become the more privileged in Democrat-run woke-topias, and they'll be allowed to terrorize society with almost complete immunity for as long as certain words, memes, phrases, and jokes upset them. But I say almost because there is still one group who is more privileged above both. So privileged, in fact, that one cannot even mention how much political power they have in Western societies. Nick Cannon learned this lesson the hard way last year, now didn't he? Now before I go, I'd like to point out that I purposely called Fissin' Nagoy an Ooga Booga because I'm performing a little social experiment. Of those of you who are listening to me, how many of you are proud anti-racist leftists? Also, how many of you became more emotionally upset with me calling this rapist an Ooga Booger than you ever were of hearing about him raping a defenseless woman? Before I receive answers to my 2 proposed questions, I am willing to bet my cock on the chopping block that if you're a leftist, you are more likely to be upset with me calling a black rapist a supposedly racist epithet than you were towards the black rapist himself physically assaulting a defenseless woman for 40 minutes and with nobody coming to her aid, just sitting there watching and with some filming. So if proven true, what would that say about your fucking priorities? As a self-proclaimed warrior of social justice. In the past decade, the left has devolved from their original anti-racist and gender equality positions into some minority-worshipping cult, where biology only seems to matter when it comes to melanin, but not when it comes to chromosomes. And as a consequence, more women like the 3 mentioned will get raped, but most of you will not have the courage nor decency to reflect on the true immorality inherent within your own political doctrine. And you would prefer to continue on with silencing my voice as well as Dave Chappelle's just for saying something mean
that bruised your fragile ego,
of which you regard as a greater travesty than the bruises and trauma that this poor woman received while being raped for 40 minutes on a crowded fucking train in Philadelphia by some Congolese Ooga Booga criminal just because his genetic and geographical makeup is politically advantageous for the Democrat Party's great resetter donor class. And let's not forget that when many were verbally outraged over the Loudoun County incident, many transgender activists were bravely mitigating the controversy surrounding the 2 young girls being brutally raped by one of their own members by simply scolding those who misgendered the rapist. Because words of violence. Words of violence. A bullshit phrase hypocritically uttered by the most violent, nation-destroying political movement plaguing the Western world today.